Pilot calls police on black boy, but he didn't know the boy's father was the commander of an aircraft carrier. The morning at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport was, as always, noisy, hurried, and a little exciting. People hustled at the check-in desk, suitcases clattered on the tile, announcements blared from bilingual speakers. But in one of the glass rooms, hidden behind a pilot's-only sign, there was an almost ringing silence. Cushioned chairs, a coffee machine, a couple of lockers, and a large screen on the wall, where a report on the heroic landing of a plane with failed engines was playing without sound. Jaden Miller sat on the edge of the dark gray chair, his feet slightly off the floor, his fingers rubbing the badge around his neck. It read, Horizon Youth Flight Program Visitor, Jaden Miller. He read it over and over again as if convincing himself it was all happening in real life. A 15-year-old kid from Chattanooga, Tennessee, in a place where only those whose names are written on flight schedules and whose uniforms are heavy with patches and insignia get in. Today he felt a little closer to the sky than he ever had before. It all started with a competition. In the school auditorium, Jaden sat in the third row, out of breath as the principal announced the names of the winners of the Horizon program. He didn't immediately realize he'd heard his own. He had to reread the letter 3 times to believe that his essay on the importance of inclusiveness in aviation had actually been chosen. After that, long weeks of preparation, approvals, briefings. And here he is. Sitting in the pilot's chair, he stares at the screen where Captain Renee Todd, the black woman who was the hero of the recent Denver incident, smiles at the reporters and says that everyone should have a chance to fly the skies. Those words seem to have hit Jaden over the head. His dream was born at the age of 6 when he saw his father, an aeronautical engineer, drawing lines on a napkin that looked like wings. From then on, all his attention was turned upward, to the stars, to the clouds, to the humming silhouettes in the sky. He could tell a Boeing 737 from an Airbus A320 by the sound of the turbines, and his home computer was full of simulators, maps, and cockpit diagrams. And today, it seemed his world had finally opened the door for him, even if only briefly. He knew he wasn't supposed to be here alone. Ms. Randall from HR, a polite woman with a short haircut and clear eyes, brought him in personally and said, 5 minutes, sit and watch, I'll be right back. She left, leaving the door ajar. Behind her, people in uniform were snooping around, walking past quickly, not paying attention. Almost no one. Almost. It must have been about 10 minutes. Jaden was still staring at the screen, not noticing some of the glances behind the glass lingering on him longer than usual. One man in a ground maintenance uniform whispered something to his coworker and nodded toward the room. The man shrugged but looked back. Another employee passed by, glanced briefly at Jaden's badge and then turned away, her lips pressed together. Jaden saw this out of the corner of his eye, but he didn't pay much attention. He wasn't used to being suspicious. He was known at home, respected at school. He thought it was enough to be polite, hardworking, smart. That was enough. He leaned back in his chair, tucked his badge behind his shirt collar, and looked at the screen again. There was a program about pilot training the cadets in the simulator, the clear commands, the noise of the systems. Jaden's heart raced. He imagined one day being among them, confidently holding the wheel, watching the instruments, hearing the dispatcher's voice in his headphones. He'd even forgotten he was in alien space. He almost believed that he was already a part of this world. The click of the door and heavy footsteps cut short his thoughts. A tall woman with a straight posture and blonde hair gathered in a tight bundle entered the room. A silver aviation security badge gleamed on her lapel. It was Melissa Strong, the airport's senior security officer. Her gaze fell immediately on Jaden. He straightened automatically. Melissa didn't smile. Her face was stony, her eyes studying him like a scanner. She stepped closer, examining the chair, the badge, the screen as if something didn't add up. After hesitating, she spoke in a steady but cold voice. Who authorized you to be here? Jaden didn't immediately realize it was addressed to him. The smile on his face slowly faded. He felt the air in the room grow heavier. It was as if someone had turned off the lights without touching the switch. Melissa Strong took her time approaching the teenager. She stood at the entrance with her arms folded across her chest, scrutinizing the picture in front of her. A young black boy in the pilot's lounge. Alone. Unaccompanied. With a badge that looked too neat, almost like it had been printed on a home printer. She sensed immediately that something was wrong. Purely intuitively, by the look in his eyes, the way he sat, the way he straightened up sharply when he saw her. Melissa noticed such little things instantly. She was proud of that instinct. 27 years in aviation security. She'd built her career on her ability to anticipate where a threat was possible. Melissa never relied on kindness or favors. She believed that order is kept within clear boundaries, and those who don't fit in should be taken out of the system immediately. Everyone should know their place. And when she saw a stranger in his place, there was no doubt. "Your ID," she said calmly but with coldness in her voice as she stepped closer. The guy took hold of his badge as if he'd suddenly forgotten where it hung. She watched every movement, too slow, too careful, as if she were choosing her words to avoid saying something unnecessary. He held out the badge. She took it with 2 fingers, looked at it. Neat font, photo, program name. Something of a school initiative. But the wording itself sounded like someone's attempt to make teenagers feel part of the larger world without giving them real access. She unfolded the card, checked the back, looked at the hologram. Her gaze grew harder. "Where did you get this?" she asked in an even voice. "Ms. Randall in Human Resources gave it to me," the boy answered, his voice barely audible. "I'm in the Early Career Guidance program." She wasn't listening anymore. It sounded like memorized text. It was all too smooth. She held out the badge back but didn't let go right away. She'd seen these types. They weren't dangerous, but they could be a source of headaches. Especially if something serious happened and then it turned out one of them was in the wrong place. Melissa couldn't afford to be the one who missed it. A young guy in a blue uniform, a security intern named Logan, froze next to the door. Melissa didn't know him well, but remembered that he was only in his 2nd month at the airport. He looked at her uncertainly as if he wanted to say something but didn't dare. She felt that look without turning around. Newcomers often didn't understand how the real rules worked. Melissa turned to the walkie-talkie on her shoulder. Her voice was crisp, measured, without unnecessary emotion. "Sender, this is Strong. There is a minor with an unconfirmed badge in the pilot's lounge. Please dispatch officers to check it out." The boy tensed immediately. His eyes rounded, his lips quivered. He took a step back as if he realized something. But he didn't run away. She appreciated that. Too often teenagers lost their temper. At least this one was standing. Jaden's insides collapsed. He didn't immediately realize what had just happened. He didn't hear the intonation, didn't realize that he hadn't just been asked for ID, but that security had been called. He was standing in the middle of a strange room with his badge in his hand and he couldn't breathe. A scene from high school flashed before his eyes. How he was sitting on a stool in front of the principal, and she was handing him an envelope with the Horizon logo on it. How the teachers clapped for him and his mom sobbed quietly as she videotaped it. How he then ran outside holding that very badge in his hand and said out loud, "I got it." For the first time in his life he felt like the world was noticing him in spite of him, but because of him. And now that badge was being held by someone else's hand, and security had already been called on him. Logan stepped cautiously closer, glancing back and forth at Melissa and Jaden. He knew about the program. He'd seen a mailing from HR this morning with the names of the 4 students and their pictures. He was pretty sure this guy was one of them. But Melissa's voice was so sure. So definitive. And he didn't know if he could contradict her. It had only been a few minutes, but the silence had become unbearable. A rumble of footsteps came from the hallway. 3 security officers approached quickly and coherently, as if they'd been called to an explosion, not a teenager. Melissa took a half step back, giving way. One of the officers, tall, with a square chin and a mechanical voice, nodded toward Jaden. "Show me what you have with you." Jaden's knees buckled. He felt his whole body go woozy. He opened his mouth but no voice came out. Everyone was looking at him. And in every look, it wasn't curiosity anymore, suspicion. Jaden stood frozen in the center of frozen time. Everything around him was humming like a fog, but the sounds didn't reach his consciousness. One of the guards approached slowly, gesturing for him to open his backpack. Jaden obeyed. The movements were mechanical. Inside, just a bottle of water, a notebook, a wallet, and a copy of the very letter from Horizon, signed and stamped by the HR director. The guard looked through the contents without even bothering to look at the letter. Everything looked calm, but that only made it worse. Melissa stood a little further back, reserved but with a noticeable inner wariness. She watched the guards deal with the situation, and was already mentally drafting a report, clear, concise, with the wording "reasonable suspicion of access violation." It was all routine to her. A teenager in the lounge wasn't a tragedy, it was an incident that required a protocol response. Especially if the teenager wasn't someone she expected to be here. Logan was still silent. He sensed something wrong was going on here, but the fear of being on the wrong side was stronger. He looked away as if that would save him from something. Meanwhile, memories began to surface in Jaden's mind, sharp, luminous, like images burned into his memory. He'd been a little boy when his father had first taken him to the National Flight Control Center. It had seemed like magic at the time, the screens, the charts, the hum of voices and the glow of screens, and next to him Michael Miller, a man who was feared and respected, but who to Jayden was just Dad. That day was the first step toward a dream. His father didn't just talk, he showed him how the systems worked, how weather data was processed, how to react to an emergency in the air. And then there were evenings at home, when Michael plugged in the simulator and taught his son the basics of piloting. How to keep the horizon line, how to avoid a stall, how to think ahead. And every night before he went to bed he'd say, "You'll fly, Jay. The main thing is don't let anyone tell you you're not worthy." He never called his father by his first name. He never bragged about what he did for a living. He wanted to make it on his own. That's why he didn't put his father's last name on the Horizon application form. Didn't want any favors. He wanted a chance. But now, with grown men standing around him with cold eyes, with his gaze viewed not as a future pilot but as a potential threat, he regretted it for the first time in his life. He pulled out his cell phone. His hands were shaking so badly he barely made it into the room. One dial tone. A second. His heart rumbled in his chest, a tight lump in his throat. "Dad?" he whispered when the other end answered. "I'm in Atlanta. I'm in the lounge. I got pulled over. They say the badge is fake. They don't believe it. Can you talk to them?" There was dead silence in the room. Even the guards froze. Melissa turned at the voice, squinting. She slowly stepped closer and said with frank skepticism, "Daddy? Sure, get Daddy. He's probably part of the program too? Or maybe delivering lunches to the terminal." Her voice was flat, but there was a sneer in it, carefully wrapped in icy professionalism. She looked at Jayden as if he were a pathetic intruder hoping someone would pull him out by his ears. A few of the pilots behind the glass glanced over. Some snickered. Logan took a step back as if he physically couldn't stand to stand around anymore. "You're here because someone dragged you through," Melissa added, not raising her voice but emphasizing every word. "And, believe me, I'm going to find out who." Jayden's chest felt tight. He saw the world he'd believed in, the world of pilots, of skies, of rigor and precision, now breaking down right in front of his eyes. And there was nothing he could do. Only hold the phone and hear his father's tense voice in it. "I'm on my way, Jay. Don't move. I'm on it." He didn't know exactly what his father would do, but every word sounded like an order from the cabin. Calm, confident, reassuring. It wasn't more than 3 minutes later when one of the guards, the oldest, received a call on his radio. He jerked his shoulder away, listened, then turned sharply to Melissa. His face had gone pale. "Melissa," he said in a low voice. "We have a change of situation. The emergency line says an FAA representative is on his way here. A high-ranking one. He asked for immediate access." Melissa frowned. There was a tension on her face that was no longer hidden behind a mask of professionalism. "Who was it?" she asked, but there was uncertainty in her voice. The guard slowly lowered his gaze to Jayden. "His father, by the looks of it. Michael Miller." Footsteps could be heard in the hallway in front of the lounge. At first solitary, then multiple, coherent ones. The sound of shoes on polished tiles merged with the slight rustle of austere jackets. Those behind the glass partition turned toward the sound, as if they sensed something important approaching. The guards tensed. One of the officers, still standing at Jayden's side, absent-mindedly adjusted the walkie-talkie on his shoulder and took a step back. Melissa didn't move, but it was obvious from the look on her face that she was mustering all the self-control she could to keep her expression steady. Even her poise trembled slightly, however, when a man in a dark blue suit appeared in the doorway with perfect posture and a predatory confidence in his gaze. He was followed by two men and one woman, in strict FAA uniforms. Their appearance was lightning fast, yet almost solemn. It was as if the room had shrunk, the air thicker. Michael Miller walked forward without looking back. He spotted Jayden at once, his son standing a little farther away, still clutching the phone in his hand. Without a word, he walked over, put his hand on the boy's shoulder, and pressed it lightly against him. Jayden looked up. Everything flashed in his eyes: relief, tension, vulnerability, hope. They hadn't exchanged a word. But everything had been said. It was the same gesture that spoke to everyone present. "I am here. This is my son. And now you will all explain yourselves." Michael turned to Melissa. His face was impassive, but there was steel in his voice, taut as a high-voltage cable. "I need immediate access to the security cameras for the last hour, starting from the moment my son entered the pilot's area. I also need a written report from each of the guards present and from you personally." Melissa tried to speak, but her voice betrayed her. Only a dry "of course" escaped her lips. She nodded to one of the staff members, and he immediately left the room to retrieve the archival record. Michael didn't look at her. He stood straight as if he knew his presence was eloquent enough. The crowd behind the glass had visibly increased. People, previously indifferent, were now tensely watching what was happening. Some whispered something, some were already quietly asking their colleagues, "Is that him?" The same Miller from Washington. Logan stood huddled against the wall. He didn't know how to react. Inside shame. For keeping silent. For not getting between Jaden and this whole machine. He looked at Michael and suddenly realized how different real authority was from formal authority. The recording came quickly. A portable tablet was plugged into the monitor, and the video played on the screen. The first shot was Jaden entering the room accompanied by a woman in a light-colored blouse. Her face was clearly visible. Ms. Randall from HR. She smiles welcomingly, points to a chair, says something and hands the teenager a name tag, then walks away, leaving the door ajar. Next, Jaden sits down, pulls out his phone, watches TV. Everything is calm. Everything is crystal clear. There's silence in the room. Not dead as before, but confused. A few people looked at each other. Some raised their eyebrows. Melissa still stood, unmoving, but now her face had lost confidence. She was paler than usual. Her eyes darted between the screen and Michael. Michael slowly turned his head toward her. "Would you like to explain the basis on which you accused my son of access hacking?" Melissa squeezed out. "His presence seems suspicious to me. Unaccompanied. Security concerns. Did you look at today's newsletter from the personnel department?" One of the FAA employees asked. It contained the names of the program participants and their pictures. Jaden was on the list. Melissa didn't answer anything. The air in the room seemed to grow cold. Michael continued calmly but firmly. "I am aware that over the past 3 years you have received at least 3 complaints of biased behavior against young interns and guests with social or ethnic backgrounds different from yours. And I am also aware that for some reason these complaints were not referred to central office. They will now be addressed." The noise behind the glass intensified. The security officers glanced around. Logan lowered his eyes. Michael took a half step back, turned to his son and said almost in a whisper, "It's okay. You're safe now." Jaden seemed to take his first real breath of the day. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, but not for Jaden anymore. He stood beside his father, as if rooted in his own dignity, as if all those hours of pressure had forged in him an inner strength he hadn't known he had. Melissa Strong was still standing across from him, slightly to the side, with her back straightened and her gaze downcast. Michael didn't raise his voice, didn't try to demean. His words sounded calm, clear, but each one seemed to seal what was happening in an act of direct responsibility. He announced Melissa's immediate suspension until a full internal investigation was completed. His phrase was delivered without pathos, but with such businesslike precision that no one doubted its execution. The FAA representative standing behind him immediately confirmed the order and made a notation in his clipboard. Several of the guards glanced around. Those who had been silently following Melissa's orders not so long ago now seemed to pull away from her, instinctively. Melissa tried to say something, but Michael only raised his palm. It wasn't a gesture of force but a limit. He simply didn't give her the opportunity to turn responsibility into an excuse. No one said another word. Everything had already been said. When it was over, Jaden didn't triumph. He didn't look at Melissa with hatred. He didn't smile. He just stood there with his shoulders slumped, as if he didn't feel victory but an exhausted storm. He quietly told his father that he didn't want her fired. He didn't want revenge. He wanted no one else to go through what he had gone through. Michael only nodded. That was their greatest commonality, the understanding that strength was not in retaliation but in dignity. As the crowd began to disperse, a woman in a pilot's uniform emerged from the crowd. Her steps were light but confident. She wore 4 gold stripes on her lapel. She approached Jaden, bowed her head and held out her hand. Her eyes were warm, her voice soft but full of inner fire. Her name was Sarah Williams. An international pilot with 20 years of experience. Once, she admitted later, she too had had to go through blind stares and cold halls. She turned to Michael and said briefly that she wanted to show Jaden the cockpit before the flight. He nodded and Jaden followed her as if into a new world. They walked through corridors where no one whispered behind his back now. Things were different. Not because of fear. Because of recognition. Everyone knew Sarah, and the fact that she was walking beside Jaden was a signal. He was here, rightfully so. When the door to the cockpit opened and Jaden saw the control panel in front of him, A multitude of buttons, displays, levers and lights, his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't like a simulator. This was the living heart of the machine. Sarah showed him where the autopilot was, where the navigation was, how the system was checked for failure. He listened intently, not like a boy just being shown a toy, but like a man who felt this was his way. Before leaving, Sarah looked him in the eye and told him she had no doubt one day he would sit in the captain's chair. With those words, she left him alone with that moment. Later that evening, she and her father drove to a hangar outside the airport. There, in the corner, under a tarp, was an old two-seat airplane, the same one that Jaden had once modeled with his father, and then they had rebuilt it together in the workshop for an exhibition. His father removed the cover, and looking at the familiar shape, Jaden suddenly felt that everything that had been there before hadn't disappeared. It had become a foundation. A foundation. This airplane, the smell of the paint, the cracked wing, this was the home where the dream had been born. They sat in silence and Michael smiled for the first time that day. There are no strangers in the sky, he said. There are only those who fly, and who have not given up. A week had passed. And Jaden was no longer standing in the lounge or the hangar. He was standing on the stage of his school's auditorium, in front of hundreds of students, teachers and parents. He was given a microphone and at first his voice shook. But then he spoke. He didn't mention names. He didn't describe the humiliation. He talked about the sky. About how it remains open to anyone who dares to go up, no matter what. He talked about how you don't have to be silent when you see injustice. That not every conflict requires a punch, but every conflict requires a voice. When he finished, the audience gave him a standing ovation. And Jaden realized, now he wasn't just a teenager with a dream. Now he was a voice that was being heard. He looked up to the window in the ceiling. There was the morning sky, clear, transparent, and it belonged to him. Dear viewers, thank you for being with us. Subscribe to the channel, like us, and be sure to write in the comments what you think of this story. Don't forget to click on the bell, so you don't miss new interesting stories. See you soon.